What's up, future husbands and wives? And welcome to the Dating Life Podcast. I'm Nate J. Clark, your Latter-day Saint dating coach, and I'm here to talk dating on the road to eternal marriage. Angie, I'm so glad to have you on today. How are you?
I'm great, Nate. How are you?
Good. It's always a pleasure to get to have a guest who I've been friends with for so long. When did we first become friends? I want to say it's been at least like 4 or 5 years, right?
Yeah, it was October 2020 or leading into 2020.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that friend camp out.
Yeah, that
Good
was a
times.
blast.
Well, I'm glad to have you on today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself so that our listeners can get to know you?
Sure, I'd love to. So I'm Angie. I am 26 years old. I currently am going to BYU getting my undergrad in geography with an emphasis in global studies. I'm also minoring in Africana studies. I love Africa and anything that has to do with African culture, African history. Let's see. I currently, right now, I'm in the dating phase where I'm dating someone that's pretty incredible. I really like him, so that's good. And I love, I don't know, going outside, doing things in nature, hiking. I actually got to go hike Mount Kilimanjaro this last May and summit Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. So that was a huge bucket list item. That was awesome.
That's so cool. Angie is such a good example. Angie, you're such a good example of someone who has a life that you love, where you just go on adventures and you make life enjoyable no matter where you're at with your dating life. And I think that's such a good example to set for all of our listeners, because ultimately that's what ends up helping us be relaxed and be ourselves and be attractive when we do meet someone that might be a good fit, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And life is too short not to just enjoy it and make it the life you want.
So true. So true. I think it was Matthew Hussey, the dating coach Matthew Hussey, that once said something like, if you want to improve your love life, build a life you love.
I love that. I resonate with that 100%.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited to hear what principles you want to share that you've learned from your dating life today. How many do you have for us?
I've got 3.
Perfect. Do you want to list them for us? And then you could start by going into depth a little bit more on the first one?
Yeah, I'd love to. So they all kind of intermingle with each other. The first one is, and Julia mentioned this on a past podcast that you did, but the concept of just being your true self. And kind of along with that, not people pleasing. I think that's a huge thing I've had to learn. The second principle is that vulnerable conversations can be a beautiful building experience, right? They don't have to be these things we have to avoid or feel like it's going to be like, the make or break of our relationship. And then the third principle is that differences don't necessarily equate a disconnect. We can be in wonderful relationships with people that are so different from us, and it can be an awesome thing. Like, we don't have to worry that just because we have differences, we won't be compatible.
Yeah. So just to make sure I understood, first one, be yourself, not people pleasing. Second one is vulnerable conversations can be a beautiful thing. And then the last one was that differences don't necessarily mean incompatibility or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you said it better than I did. What did you say?
I said differences don't equate disconnect.
Don't equate disconnect. Okay. Just taking a few notes here. Disconnect. I'm excited to hear more about these, how you learned them, and what you mean when you say them. Let's hear about being yourself and not people pleasing.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I want to make the caveat that any thing that I've learned or advice that I may share in this podcast, I want listeners to take with the understanding that it may not be advice for them, right? Like, these is things that I've learned because of my personality and how I've gone about life. And so it may not be something that other people need to listen to, but I feel like at least a little bit of each of these could be helpful to anyone. So, with being my true self, this was probably one of the hardest things I had to learn in relationships, because I naturally am a very um, giving person. And I've found that in past relationships, that often would equate to me kind of losing myself in the relationship.
Mm.
And that people pleasing aspect had a huge role to play in that, because when my partner shared things that they wanted to do or things that were important to them, rather than maintaining this healthy interdependence of like supporting them in that, but also supporting my goals and dreams and aspirations, I would just put all my eggs in their basket.
Mm.
And it took a huge toll on me and the relationship, because I didn't realize that it was also hindering my ability to be vulnerable and connect with them. And so they weren't getting the real me.
Mm.
And in any relationship, when you're wanting to connect with people, that is one of the essential pieces, is you have to be yourself, because if they're not getting the true you, then they don't know who they're really dating, right?
Yeah.
So when I was dating this guy, Jeffrey, and I was also so anxious that I didn't want to lose this relationship, right? Um and I think I put all of my eggs into his basket, in the sense that anytime he brought up uh maybe some things that weren't clicking well, or maybe places where we could um compromise or come together to reach a solution, I would just people please. And
Mm.
I would say, okay, this is what you want. I'm going to do it 100%, you know? And there came a point in the relationship where he had expressed that he had some interest in a past relationship that he wanted to figure out. And I was like, okay, that's fine. No worries. Like, you do what you need to do, and I'll be right here beside you the whole time.
Mm.
And had I think looking back on that experience, had I actually had enough courage and self respect to be like, I really want you to feel all in whatever relationship you're in. So if there's things that you still need to figure out with this past relationship, go for it. I'll support you. But I'm not necessarily going to be on the side waiting for you to make your decision, right? Like, I think one of the things I wish I would have done was to just say, I want you to be all in with me or with whoever. And so I'm going to take a step back, and I'm going to let you figure it out. And if and when you decide you want to come back to me, that's great. But I'm not just going to be sitting around here waiting for you to make your decision. You know, I think we both kind of deserved that. And had I had enough um, courage, like I said earlier, to say that, I think it would have been much healthier for both of us in the long run.
Yeah. Wow. Such a good principle. I'm understanding more of what you mean now, and it made me think of something. I was in a conversation with my sister yesterday about. Um, I was asking her for advice on building a course for how to bounce back from breakups, and she talked about how when she first started dating, she oftentimes got so invested in her relationships that she kind of felt like this guy she was dating was her future. And so when the breakup happened, it was like devastating. It was like, my future's gone. My future just got canceled.
Yeah.
And that's what came to mind as you talked about putting all of your eggs into someone else's basket, or kind of losing yourself in the relationship, not making yourself a priority at all, just like only focusing on making your partner a priority. Um, because ultimately, healthy relationships come from two healthy, independent individuals
Yeah.
that have learned how to be healthy, independent, and can now come together and be interdependent rather than the unhealthy codependent,
Mhm.
right? Interdependent, we're able to not focus all of our time fixing the relationship, but all of a sudden we're healthy enough, and it's a balanced enough relationship where we can turn outward and seek to bless the world, right? And so, yeah, I feel like there's really big implications for following the principle that you've just shared. It can literally be the difference between unhealthy and healthy, versus, and very unproductive, fixing relationship problems all the time versus very productive changing the world together. Kind of a difference between those two potential outcomes, I guess. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think also it just becomes, when you're in that mindset, your relationship is very myopic. It's like all you think about. And so that
Yeah.
outwardness of being able to turn outward and really use your relationship to thrive and to bless other people around you, that's where that interdependence gets you. And I love that.
Yeah. Makes me think a lot about attachment styles. Have you studied those a little bit?
Yeah, a lot.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is the principle of going from potentially more on the anxious side of the spectrum toward secure, where it's like, look, I'm not going to, like, I don't know, get really upset or anything if this person decides they want to go look into another relationship, which is secure, and I'm also not going to be waiting around, which is also secure. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas an anxious would be like, would be a little bit more on the anxious side would be the waiting around and, oh, it's fine, do whatever you need to do, right? Whereas the avoidant probably wouldn't have been able to commit to the relationship in the first place and would probably just, yeah, be in a situationship, as they're calling it these
Yeah.
days. So I love that you're giving very secure dating advice, Angie. That's something I think could help a lot of people if they're able to hear that and understand it and apply it in their dating lives. Any other thoughts on that before we move on to your second principle?
Nope, I think that's all I've got for that one.
Cool, awesome. Well, tell me about how beautiful vulnerable conversations can be.
Okay. Oh my gosh, this has been something I've learned just recently. I'd say probably within the last 8 months or so. As I've been dating my current boyfriend, who I'll call Felix. um, and I'll probably also kind of preface the third principle of how differences are important because it plays into this. But at first, Felix was a guy that I would not be initially drawn to, not really my type, as people would say. Um, and so when we decided to first start dating, our differences played into how many vulnerable conversations we'd had to have. And I had gone into this relationship kind of with the belief or mindset that vulnerable conversations were really difficult
Mm.
and that they're kind of like hurdles to a relationship. It's like working out the kinks. Um, and throughout the course of our relationship, I've actually come to realize that while vulnerable conversations can be uncomfortable, they don't have to be difficult.
Mm.
Because when you think of it, rather than coming together and having the conversation of like, oh, well, what is someone doing wrong? What can we do to fix it? It's more about coming together and thinking, what can we do to help our relationship thrive and grow even more? It's a more productive way of viewing the conversation, I think.
Mm.
Um, and the reason this is so important, I feel like going back to what I mentioned in principle one, is you have to be vulnerable enough to share the ugly parts of you, or else you're not going to get anywhere. And so taking the time to share, like, this is something I feel is selfish, but I think I need, or I know I'm being angry and I'm being maybe not so nice right now, but I need to get this out, right? And the more you have those conversations, I feel like the better you get at sharing those things without the heightened emotions of anger or hostility or anything like that. And they become these beautiful conversations where you come together and you share your worst parts or your most vulnerable parts with someone that you know is going to love you despite what you share with them. And trust plays a huge part in that as well. But um, I don't know. That's what I've got so far. Any thoughts?
I love that. Um, it seems like at the beginning you were talking about kind of two different potential ways to go about hard, vulnerable conversations. One where it kind of feels like me versus you, whereas the other feels a little bit more like us versus it.
Yeah,
Is
100%.
that kind of what you were saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's a subtle difference, but it's huge. Like, and I really feel like that's one of the things that leads to a really healthy marriage is learning how to approach issues as the issues rather than um, thinking the other person is the issue. When in reality, they're not. They're just human like you, right?
Yeah.
with their own limitations and insecurities. And so, yeah, I would say that's been one of the biggest. The principle you're sharing has been one of the biggest things that's helped me and my wife to have a healthy marriage is that we try really, really hard not to think that the other person is the issue, but rather to approach these conversations side by side, looking at the issue together. And you're right. The more we do that, the easier it is to feel a little bit more calm and kind of step away from these uncomfortable emotions and analyze these emotions and the reason that they're so heightened as the problem rather than the other person's the problem, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, such valuable insights there that you shared. Um, Not to mention, man, being able to successfully navigate a vulnerable conversation leads to beautiful outcomes because it leads to increased connection, right? Which is what we all yearn for, is to feel connected to another person. And it's our vulnerabilities that make us lovable, you know? They act as a catalyst for connection because it would be really hard for an imperfect human like myself to connect with someone who seems to be perfect. But if they're also imperfect, then, oh, like, we got stuff in common. And I can be strong where you're weak, and you can be strong where I'm weak, and yeah, vice versa.
Yeah. Absolutely. I also think there's this, and perhaps this is just me and this actually isn't real, but I feel like there's this common mindset going around in society right now that you have to take care of yourself.
Hmm.
That you have to be so independent that any sign of vulnerability is weakness.
uh,
And I don't agree with that. I actually think that in order to really have a deep, emotionally connective relationship, you have to be willing to be vulnerable and show weakness. Because the truth is, you can't do everything for yourself. You can't take care of yourself. You need other people to connect with. And none of us were meant to go this life alone. And so vulnerability is a huge part to play in that.
yeah. And what you just said is true for our relationship with God too. I was just thinking the times when I felt the most connected to God are the times when I'm the most vulnerable with Him. When I humble myself and I'm like, I'd like to think that I got this, God, but I don't. Like, I need your help, and I need the help of your Son in order to
Yeah.
make it through this. And those are the times when I feel heaven the closest. And so it's a true principle, whether it's human to human, mortal to mortal, or mortal to a loving heavenly parent. That's a very true principle.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah, any other thoughts on that? I think that's huge, and you're right. That is a common thing in the world today, and it's something that we need to change.
Yeah. I will add one more thing. I heard this quote that said, all frustrations are based on unmet expectations.
Mm.
And I think this applies because you could handle this in one way and just say, well, okay, well, if it's all about unmet expectations, I just won't expect anything. And then I'll never be sad. I don't think that's I don't think that's the principle because I think in any relationship we have expectations, right? We have goals that we would like this relationship to meet. And so vulnerability comes in where you share those expectations with people,
Mm.
rather than having expectations that you just keep in your head, and if they're not met you get upset or you fall to pieces. Take these vulnerable conversations as opportunities to share your expectations and to be willing to adapt if your expectations are just too far, right? Or maybe not enough. um, so that's the other thing I would add to these vulnerable conversations is sharing your expectations with each other.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. you just made me think of how I wish that in the exclusive dating relationships I had before getting married, I wish that I had included in like the conversation where we became official. I wish I had included some expectations on my side and asked them if they were the same on their side. Even on basic things. Like I wish I would have said things like, "Hey, so it'd be fun to date exclusively," and that's something, that it seems like we both want. Before we make it official, I'd love to just kind of make sure we're on the same page with what that means to both of us. To me, it means, that you're not going to go on dates with anyone else. That you're just going to go on dates with me, and that I'm not going to go on dates with anyone else. I'm just going to go on dates with you, and that we'll probably see each other like, several times a week to maybe even every day, depending on what we want to do. But that we'll be in touch, and you know, we'll probably text occasionally if there is a day or two where we don't see each other. There's kind of a constant contact there, so that we can continue to explore this relationship. What are your thoughts? What are your expectations? Right? I wish I had done that. I think that would have really helped things be a lot clearer and more relaxed going into a relationship, rather than, I don't know, rather than having some fears and insecurities, and even being triggered if they did need some space, because all of a sudden I had an unmet had an unmet expectation that was never talked about.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you, Nate. And I think also too that if you take the time to lay out and share your expectations, you'll have less of these heightened emotion, vulnerable conversations where you have to kind of like work it down because you've already
Mhm.
taken time to lay the groundwork. And so those vulnerable conversations are more reserved for like the deeper um, emotional connection things rather than the, hey, I'm really upset that we didn't have a clear expectation on here on this and that we need to resolve that.
Yeah, good point. We kind of address the more trivial things beforehand so that we don't have to waste energy and emotion on them later. Not
Yeah.
that it's a waste, but things can just go smoother. Is there anything else that comes to your mind that you think it would be good for people to get on the same page with before getting into an exclusive relationship, whether that be dating or marriage?
I mean, I think you touched on an important one of just kind of like expectations for when you're first entering a relationship. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean you both are on the same page that you're not going to date other people, that you're just going to date each other? Um, Physical
Mhm.
expectations as well. I think you mentioned this in a previous podcast as well, but um, regards to like kissing, whether you both feel comfortable kissing in front of other people or if that's more of a private thing, if you're going to hold hands in front of other people or not, and when in the relationship you feel those physical communications are appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that worked really well for me that I did get on the same page with as I began to date almost everyone I dated, I think, if not everyone. I think it was everyone I dated exclusively. As we were getting close to being exclusive, I would always say, "Hey, there's an acronym I like to follow when I start dating someone exclusively. So if we date exclusively, is this something that you'd like to follow with me?" And the acronym is things to avoid, and the acronym's HALT. Have you heard of that one before?
I've heard of halt, but I don't know if it's the same words that you're thinking of.
Yeah, so things to avoid, and this really helped me as far as having healthy physical affection boundaries all the way up to temple marriage, and helping keep the law of chastity. But um, it's not a commandment; it's just a nice safety railing. H was for horizontal position. A was for alone, like in areas that are inaccessible to other people, right? Behind locked doors, things like that, like two alone. And then L was for late. And then T I learned could be for one of two things or for both T words. The first one was for tongue when kissing, avoiding French kissing, and the other T was for time when it comes to kissing and like how long is it turning into like a makeout session, or is it a kiss goodnight, right? Kind of a thing. And trying to like avoid those things, lengthy time or tongue, or you know, extremely late. Oh, the late one was interesting because I heard that there's a point when you get tired enough that the sleepiness and the tiredness can have similar effects to like being intoxicated, like alcohol.
Mhm.
I think we probably all experienced that when I get a little tired, a little loopy. Everything's funny, right? Anyway, that was something that helped me a lot as far as getting on the same page with expectations, so that we didn't have to, constantly be having conversations about one or the other person feeling uncomfortable with, certain physical affection, acts of physical affection. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I like that a lot. Can I ask you a question, Nate?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Was that an acronym that you went by your entire dating experience, or was that just for maybe the beginning? How did you use that
No,
acronym?
I learned that from my first girlfriend. And pretty sure that I brought it up with every single girl I dated, toward the beginning, including my wife. And yeah, she said it meant a lot to her. In the words of another girl that said it meant a lot to her, she said, "I'm so tired of playing referee when it comes to physical boundaries." And so it just meant a lot, right? So yeah, that's something that I think works really, really well, for both dating exclusively and for being engaged. Yeah,
That's awesome. I really admire that. That's really cool.
yeah, it was helpful. Anything else that comes to mind that you think would be good for people when it comes to, um, differences not needing to equate a disconnect?
Yeah, so this is probably actually one of my favorite things that I've learned.
Oh, I guess
Um,
we hadn't even started on that one yet, huh? This is the third one.
yeah, but it
Okay,
transitions perfectly.
perfect.
And this is also something that I've learned with my current boyfriend Felix. Because I mentioned earlier, we're so different that um, in past relationships, I kind of thought that if there was like, I don't know, this certain number of differences that someone held, that we just were incompatible. It
Mm,
just wouldn't work, because there's too many differences.
yeah.
Um, and actually, my stake president, he said this in one of our meetings. He said, if you meet someone that is so different from you, either marry them, start a business with them, or employ them, because you will grow and learn so much in that partnership. And I kind of chuckled because that was pretty soon after I'd started dating Felix. And he, to highlight some of our differences, he's an introvert. I'm an extrovert. He tends to be a lot more analytical, and I'm a lot more emotional. And so, um, as we've been dating, it's been really eye opening to see both how those aspects play into our strengths and also our weaknesses.
Mm,
Um, One example of this is frequently when we have conversations where we'd like to address certain things that have been weighing on us. At the beginning of our relationship, there would be some friction when he would say things, and I would interpret all of this emotional kind of underlying communication with the words that he would say.
mm.
And so I
As
would
if they
get,
were hints to some other kind of
yeah,
a message.
yeah. So I would get a completely different message than what he was saying just because I interpreted it with my emotions or maybe with past experiences, right? Which is what we all do. That's how we interpret communication. Um, but once we realized that that was what was happening, it was really cool to be able to. Now we have conversations, and if he is talking about something he needs to get off his chest and share with me, he'll say, I have to just say this how I know how to say it. So please try to listen with your head and not your heart. And I'll be like, okay, okay, I can do that. And it helps me to not be so easily offended. And I'll try to just get what he's saying rather than what, the emotions may misconstrue it to be. And then I'll take a moment to clarify and I'll say, okay, so what I heard was this. Is this what you meant? And that gives him the opportunity to be like, no, 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 that's not what I meant at all. Let me clarify. And it has made our communication so much better and our relationship too, because we have gotten to this point where we're not afraid to hold things back that we feel are important to share with one another.
Mm.
And we'll just preface it with, or I'll say, okay, babe, I really need to share something with you. And I kind of need you to listen with your heart. And so he'll try to be like, okay, okay, I'll listen with my heart. And it's so cool. It's turned into this really awesome thing.
Wow, that's so healthy. That's making me think of so many different principles that I've heard taught in like, yeah, different CDs I've listened. There's a specific CD set that they've sold at Deseret Book for a long time called oh something about eternity. It's for newlyweds, and it's communication principles from this guy that studied communication for decades. And he said that they did research while he was doing his master's or PhD. They did research on like how to, like, what was the way to make sure that the most possible of your message is actually being interpreted correctly to the other person. And they did all these tests with different ways of communicating. And most of them resulted in like a very small percentage of what you're communicating actually getting through to the other person. But he said the one thing where it was like close to 100% was something he called content communicating, which is saying exactly what you mean and the other person taking those words at face value rather than thinking that they might mean a bunch of other things. And he talked about how healthy that is in marriages, because it could be so easy for one, for the husband, for example, be like, hey, babe, you want to go watch this movie? And for the wife to be like, yeah. Not that she'd have a voice that low necessarily, but right. And what is she actually saying when she says yeah that way? She's saying, not really, but I know that you're going to throw a fit if I say no. So sure, let's go. Right?
Yeah.
But if they're practicing content communicating and they've agreed to content communicate, then he needs to interpret that as, okay, great. I'm excited too. Let's go. Right? But she probably wouldn't have said that in the first place. If they were practicing content communicating, she probably would have, said what she actually meant. Anyway, I feel like it's such a healthy thing, because we avoid trying to make the other person guess what we actually mean, and we avoid so many possible misinterpretation and miscommunication by just like saying it how it is. And even then, like you said, there's the other principle of, after you do hear them out, you say, okay, here's what I understood. Is that right? What did I miss? Correct me. That's another thing that they teach in so many different communication relationship books that I've read. And the interesting thing about that is it takes vulnerability to state what you understood and ask what you're missing. Almost as much vulnerability as being like in the middle of a high school or, well, really any school class, college class. I even struggled with this sometimes. But those times in like class where the teacher's not quite making sense and you're like, am I the only one? And you're like, should I raise my hand and ask? But you're always grateful when someone else raises their hand to clarify and ask the question, right?
Yes,
Because odds
absolutely.
are, if you're confused, most of the rest of the class is probably confused too. But so often, no one raises their hand and no one asks the question. And so the whole class is confused. And as soon as the time is turned over to work on a project, everyone's looking at each other like, so what do we do? like we've all been there, right? But it takes bravery and vulnerability to be like, I don't understand. And I know I'm not stupid. We're just humans that communicate differently. Can you please clarify this, right? It's such a healthy habit to be brave enough to do that, not only in class because it helps you and the rest of the class, but in a relationship so that you can actually be on the same page with what each other is trying to communicate.
Yeah. And that can be hard to do when you may already feel in a vulnerable state where they're talking about something that that maybe is rubbing them the wrong way that you've done or something. And so you're like, I feel like I'm hurt, but I also need to ask for more hurt, you know? But really it's just opening up to more information so that you can get clarity. I love that.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. Can I ask you one more question, Angie?
Yeah, of course.
What advice, if any, do you have for all of our guy listeners from the girl's perspective when it comes to dating? If you had one piece of advice to give to the guys from the girl's perspective, what would it be?
Oh,
And it doesn't have to be like, the best thing you can think of. I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but just something that comes to mind that you feel like is important.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is, I mean, maybe not all women would agree with this, but I've met a handful of guys that have felt hurt by different past experiences with girls, whether they're like opening doors for them or trying to be a gentleman, and they get this message that women don't want that. They don't want to be helped. They want to be treated as an equal.
And I think strong, independent woman.
Yeah.
Got this.
And I think if I could tell guys one thing, it would be that we so appreciate you. Like, we need you the same way you need us.
Yeah.
And any way that you can help show up as a partner and a protector and a provider, like that, I feel like is what, at least I'm not going to say most women, but what I love about being in a relationship is this equal partnership with someone who I know is going to help me grow, but also protect me and like provide for me and help keep me safe and take care of me. I love that.
Wow. Well said. Well said. Yeah. Chivalry is not dead. It is appreciated, especially when it's offered out of love, right?
Exactly.
As in sincere kindness, as the main motive. And I love what you said. Like, it's not about neither of us as guys or girls needing each other. It's about, yes, being independent and strong, but turning toward each other with kindness and being willing to offer what we have to offer to make the other's life better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I might add that, I mean, I said someone that I would know would take care of me, but the same goes the other way, right? That we take care of them.
Yeah.
And it may not be in exactly the same way, but the fact that we know that we're in a relationship with people that we know will take care of us, it's huge.
Absolutely. Angie, this has been so good. Thank you so much for coming on. The things you shared, man, these are priceless and they're so in line with truth. I just want all our listeners to know that what Angie shared today is the truth, and it's backed by research. So, yeah, thank you again, Angie.
Oh, thank you, Nate. I'm so grateful that you had me on today. This was such a privilege.
Okay, my friends, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to check out more of my content and services at natejclark.podia, that's PODIA.com. And I'll catch you next time.